Awesome. Well, Lindsey, welcome back. You're finally back in the U.S. from your long travel there. How many countries did you end up going to?
I guess technically we were in 4. We started here, and then I was in the UK, and then I was in France, and then I was in Germany, but only for a layover. So
Yeah. So, like, between all these countries, did you get to like spend a lot of time in each one, or was it like really fast?
yeah, I guess well, it started off going to New York City, and then that was just for like 4 days, and then London was maybe for 5 days, and then we were only in Paris for a day, maybe like 12 hours or something, and then we spent most of the time in the south of France.
Okay.
So yeah, I feel like I got a nice taste of different aspects, and we were pretty remote actually in the south of France. So we were the only Americans that like I saw the whole time down there, which was kind of interesting. So yeah, I do feel like I got kind of good tastes of everywhere I was.
So for the south of France there, was it like, do you think you planned the trip like mostly around like France, like to specifically see more of that than was the other location UK, was that right?
Yeah, so it was mostly a trip to like see people and hang out actually, so we didn't actually plan much of anything before going. And so it was kind of interesting because my best friend lives in London area, so I visited her at her childhood home because she's living there right now. And then we all like then went to the south of France. Basically, she was here in Boulder for about 6 months on like an internship, and so she like made all these nice friends, and then she had to go back because her visa ended. So then the whole group of friends that she had met while she was in Boulder came and like visited her, and so that was like really fun. And so we didn't really have like specific agendas of like things we wanted to do before going, because it was mostly just like a time to hang out.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring up the south of France. Were you in the Nice like coastline Monaco area?
No, we were on the Ardèche. So we were like on a river, and we were like in a really small town called Vogue. And it was so nice because our Airbnb was like in this little small town, but it was like 5-minute walk to the river. And so we could all just like get some fresh bread and head to the river. And then we were like short drive from the Ardèche River, which has these like beautiful gorges. So we could like kayak and go to different beaches on the river. Yeah, but it was mostly just like a hangout trip.
Yeah,
with friends.
It's a fun beach town. From so we had went to Nice a while back, and we got to see like the whole area there, from like the casino to like the race that they had there. It's like a Formula 1 race in Monaco. So like we had a lot of like really famous or like celebrity people coming down there. Like, oh my gosh, like I feel really out of place, but it was really cool to see like the area and how like people are like so relaxed, and they're like, just essentially it's like a vacation spot all the time because you're right next to the water.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
Yeah, that's cool. We didn't make it to the Mediterranean at all. But that would be cool, I guess, to go another time to see.
The bread that you brought up too, that was awesome. Like, we watched this whole like documentary on like how America does bread versus how like European countries does bread, and they're like, oh my gosh, we just learned there's so much like preservatives and like other like names that we can't even pronounce in our bread. So we're like, man, like kudos to like the Europeans and how they do bread.
Yeah, it was so good. It was really nice. I am kind of confused like what they eat for lunch though. I feel like we weren't really having real lunches. It was just like bread and cheese and snacks. So that part was like, I get kind of hangry. But
fair enough.
We were able to mostly manage because we had like nice group dinners. And
What was your favorite part of the trip?
I think it was honestly just like getting to spend time with Carla, who's the person who now lives in London. Yeah, I think it like made a lot of really great community here in Boulder, but sometimes there's like certain people who just, I don't know, like you connect with so well. And it's hard when they can't live near you, you know? And so it was really nice to like be in the same place with her for an extended period of time. It's always like very special when we get to spend that time together. So.
That's very cool. Like the people are really awesome. Like that's the, like perspective wise, like that's why I really like to travel, and like because I get to see different people and, you know, their day-to-day lives and what they do. So it's like just fascinating how, like, to learn what other people do on a day-to-day basis, and it's like, wow, that's so much different than what we do here. I guess my question is like, is that sort of similar to why you enjoy traveling? Like it's just sort of like seeing different things?
I think like it can be really useful to like expand your perspectives on like how different people live and like interact, and also how they like interact with work and family and friends. And I think it's like so interesting to go to very, very different places from like where you're from, and whether that even be like within the US or ideally like within the broader context of the world. And then it's also interesting when you go somewhere and like you don't know the language, and like doing your best to communicate and like be as respectful as you can, especially in a place like France where they assumed that we were French, you know, and so they'd like start speaking. We're like,
Well, that means you did well, right? That means you did well to blend in, and you didn't
I guess so.
like look like a tourist.
I mean, as soon as we like opened our mouths, I knew, but
So I haven't been to a lot of places that don't speak like at least a little bit of English, and so it's always interesting, like when you go to a place, like we went to Japan, for example, and they did pretty well, but sometimes when you're in the more rural areas or like you're in transit, and like you have no idea what they're saying, and they have like no idea what you're saying either. So it's like I remember we had this lady, because we were asking like where should we go, like just for general directions, and she was like, she had no idea how to speak English, but she was just like jumping up and down and like trying to point to the signs. So it's like hospitality is another huge thing, like going into other countries, like how nice people are to tourists. And that's not always the case, obviously, but you know, generally like they're really nice. It's so nice to see how other people are living. And then I guess like the more places that you experience, you kind of have like broader context of the, you know, global situation too. So it was really good though. And y'all are about to head out too to Europe. And so it's always like tough on like the logistics, trying to like pack up everything, make sure you have it all, or like, you know, getting to the airport and you're like, oh, I don't have my passport, and like, oh, I really need that, so you have to go all the way back. So, you know, it's fun, but it's just usually hectic on like the day of travel. For you there, did you go on the channel going through, because you're going from UK to France, right?
We took the train. It was so cool.
Is that underwater?
I think so. It crosses the Atlantic.
So do you see like water on the side of you going through?
I think it's like a closed tunnel. It just like kind of gets dark, you know?
Gotcha. Because I was imagining like the zoo.
That would be cool. I don't know how deep it is, but it's kind of amazing because I think London and Paris are pretty far apart, and it only took like 2 hours maybe. So it was cool. I was like, wow, it's so easy to just pop back and forth compared to in the US, where that same distance would maybe get you from like California to Oregon or
on UK, specifically London, we had went during a time in which one of the royal families was getting married.
Oh wow.
Like one of the princes and like some, I think it was an American woman that was getting married, and so it was like a big deal, and like it was super packed around like the palace, like Buckingham Palace and like Parliament area, and like the running joke is that the Big Ben is always under construction.
That's
there.
Funny.
Was that the same way for you there?
I do remember that there was some like I I think is it the Houses of Parliament that are connected to Big Ben?
Mm-hmm.
There was some construction for sure on the Houses of Parliament. Yeah, that's funny. But no, it wasn't so crowded. There wasn't any like big event that was happening as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you go on like the river tour, like the River Thames and like the bridge?
No, we did like walk around. But again, I think it was like mostly just to see my friends. And so a lot of it was just kind of like walking around and having like dinner and yeah, there was a lot of walking, which was really nice because we got to like see different neighborhoods and it's so easy to get around there with all the public transit. And so that was really great. But my Carla had started a new job, so like we were kind of entertaining ourselves during the day and then she would like join us in the evenings. So yeah.
Wow, fun. Yeah, like there's a lot of activity because it's such a big city. So I remember like the London Eye was big.
Yeah.
Like the boat tours on the River Thames, and then getting to see like the London Bridge or like the Tower Bridge. And the food is really
good.
great.
Yeah.
Did you try any of that?
Yeah, we had some really good dim sum. And it was really fun. I feel like there just such a culture of spending time and like chatting and like staying around. It's not really like in the US where you get like takeout and it takes like 10 minutes and you just like scarf down your food.
Yeah.
And so it's so fun to like sit and like eat and have a drink and hang out, and there's like not really so much of a rush to like consume and be done.
Yeah, afternoon tea time.
Yeah.
That's fun. Definitely don't do much of that in the US, but like, it was really cool because it was something different and you get to learn something like culturally that they do, which was really cool.
Yeah, did y'all do a lot of tours and different things?
So we did like a smorgasbord of Europe. So we didn't. I don't think we spent as much time as you did. And so we did like Germany and like the UK, Scotland for a little bit.
That's cool.
So really getting to tour a lot of it, and like France and Italy were sort of where we capped off. And like that's fun, like that, like logistically it's really difficult because you're trying to like find cheap housing and like where to go, and like if somebody has like family members you can try to stay with them, but it's just hectic trying to keep the schedule because it was like a pretty long travel. It was like a couple weeks, and so you have to like, oh okay, like we have to make it to this place by this time, or like we have to take the train here or over there. And so like we had a lot of like Excel sheets just to like know where we're going and like where to rent vehicles and who to stay with, etc.
Yeah, that does sound like a lot of logistics.
Yeah. So bring it back here to sort of your research in the US here. So I know that you're into like wildfire research, is that right?
Yeah.
What got you interested into wildfire research?
So I like grew up in Southern California, and so there was like definitely a lot of personal experience with wildfires. I remember when I was like maybe kindergarten, the first time where we had to evacuate. And so I think there was a period of like a week or two where school was canceled and we had to like go evacuate and stay with my mom's aunt and uncle. And I remember like it raining ash and like being in the swimming pool with my family and just like seeing the ash like fall. And all of a sudden like the sky gets like dark, and then it's like during day but no light is getting through, and then it's like, oh wow, and you can like see, like actually see the soot like falling and going on your car. Yeah, and so there was definitely like a lot of that growing up. I think the worst was when we like had to evacuate for like a week or two, but the frequency and intensity of wildfires are like increasing. And so I also remember in college, like every year there was pretty severe wildfire seasons, and particularly I remember in 2020 when the San Francisco Bay Area like totally became orange. And it's because there was all of this smoke that got lofted into the air so high that it wasn't actually in the layer of air that we breathe. So the air quality was fine, but all of the smoke absorbed the different wavelengths of light. So the only light that could make it through, like the visible light, was like red. And so I remember like waking up at like 7:30 because I was student teaching at the time, but it was during COVID, so it was on Zoom. And I like looked out the window and it was just orange. And it was so apocalyptic. And then we logged onto the Zoom for our class. I was like teaching at Skyline, which is like a public high school in Oakland, but it was online. So yeah, and I like logged on and all the students were like, oh my gosh, like what's happening? And then like crazy enough, the teacher that I was paired with, my mentor teacher, had scheduled all of the lessons around wildfires. And so it was a chemistry class, like a general chemistry class, but each lesson was around the chemistry of wildfires because they wanted to like connect it to the students' lives. So first semester was chemistry of wildfires, and then second semester was about like ocean acidification and sea level rise and climate change. And so the first semester, like every lesson we were learning about wildfires, and then to like experience it in that way was really crazy. And then, I was making a big choice about, do I want to teach or do I want to go to grad school? And I like student taught all 4 years of college. And I was like pretty sure that I was going to be a high school teacher. But then I wanted to keep like all of the options open. And so I like followed the whole path for teaching and also for grad school, to the point where like I had the option at the end of college to teach or grad school, and like it was just down to the wire, like making the decision. But I remember when I was like making the Zoom calls and stuff, because it was all during COVID, about what to do for grad school, the professor I met with online from CU was really interested in wildfire chemistry. And they actually wanted to like use satellite remote sensing instruments to study wildfires. And I was like, wow, that is so cool. Like, I'm so interested in remote sensing and satellites and data processing. And then also the advisor was just so nice. And like, I liked them a lot as a person. And so then I was like, trying to make the decision, like teaching grad school. And then ultimately, I think I realized like I probably will teach in some capacity, and like am still teaching right now. And so I think I just wanted to like continue on this path of, I feel like I'm in a very unique position to be studying what I'm studying. And like, I think that right now where my like skills meet the needs of the world is like for me to be here. And I still engage with like middle schools and high schools. And I think like ultimately, if I do decide to be a primary teacher or high school teacher, this experience will only make me like a better teacher for them. So
it's more like science communication. Do you think, like in terms of like teaching like youth?
Yeah. And so I guess like there's a lot of different ways that I'm involved with kids takes place in my life now. Like it used to be that I was, training to be a high school teacher. So I was like a student teacher and planning lessons and visiting the same classes like every day or, for many hours a week. But then now there's a lot of different ways I'm involved, but my favorite way is actually through a program called PISEC. It's Partnerships for Informal Science Education in the Community. And I have like a team of grad students and undergrads, and we visit the same like middle school classroom every week. And we do project-based learning activities that revolve around physics, because it's all funded by the physics department at CU. And so last semester we were doing optics, and this semester it's mechanics. But it allows the students to like explore science and start to like see themselves as scientists. And it's very different than like the teaching I was doing before, right? Because the whole point of PISEC is like to be on the same level as the middle schoolers. Like we come in and like play with them basically, instead of being like in a position of power, like the one teaching.
That's what I was gonna say too. Like these outreach programs are so fun, because like I remember it was just so boring. Like if it was just your teacher the whole time, like because you see them the same like every single day.
Yeah.
And it's so fun whenever like something changed, or like if you have external like teacher come in, or external student outreach come in and like teach you about anything really. So we did like, you know, there was like people brought in snakes and like people brought in animals, and those would be really, really fun. So I would only imagine like if you and like other grad students together like go in, that'd be really really eye-opening for a lot of the students.
Yeah, and it's really fun too because it's like we visit the same classroom every week, so we like actually form relationships with the students and with the teachers, and it's an after-school program, at least the one I'm doing right now. And so oftentimes it's like many years of seeing the same students, and so you can like, I don't know, you're growing with them.
Mm-hmm. So I know that you have more of a heart for like student teaching and like interacting with them. Would you say it's difficult for like some grad students that aren't really like, that are like more shy about opening up essentially about like how they communicate their subjects, whether it be science or something else, to the students?
Yeah, I do think it can be like really challenging for people if they tell themselves that like, oh, I'm not good at this, like I don't like kids, like there's no way they'd understand what I'm doing, blah blah blah. But I think that like one of the most important aspects of becoming like a PhD person, like somebody with a PhD, is to have the ability to explain science to somebody kindergarten through somebody who's an expert in your field. And I think that like doing this type of, having these experiences only improve you as like an individual and a scientist and like a communicator. And I think that a lot of people are convinced that like they don't have the time for it. But I think that like, I would probably say like the most important thing about being a scientist, especially right now, is to like be able to communicate these things. And so like, I would argue that these experiences are often more important than like getting that extra experiment in or whatever, especially because you can't be like creative 24 hours a day. And so like, I think it really can only help by interacting with people with like very different skill sets. And I think that it's also really important to like give back to the community that you're in, and not to just like be a PhD student. You're here for 5+ years, you know? And so it'd be a real shame if like all you do is go to lab. Like you're here for such a big chunk of your life. And so I think it's like so important to have some roots and to like give back to the community that you're in.
That's fair. Like it's very inspirational too, like for a lot of the students, because the students come from like whatever backgrounds, like so many different backgrounds, and you know, some students have more means than others, and some people didn't grow up with much, or like the household that they come from is one that's broken, or just don't have like a mother figure or father figure around. And so to see like sort of like when you're saying like a more of like a consistent reoccurring like figure that's coming to teach you is really, really nice. Like just for them to see something else that they're not seeing at home, you know, and like, because maybe at home they're told they can do something or they can't do something, but whereas, you know, in the classroom setting they have more of an outlet to see other opportunities out there. So I think that's really cool. Do you think that's part of the reason why you do that?
Yeah, I think like one of the biggest reasons why certain groups of people are more or less drawn towards science is because like whether they see people who look like them in positions of like leadership in science. And so it can be really challenging if like you don't have anybody in your family who's been to college or does anything related to science. And so it can be really challenging to like see yourself as a scientist if like the only images you have are of men or white men or people with money, you know? Yeah. And so I think that these experiences, especially through the PsyPsych program, can be so important because like starting from young age, it can really help shape their identity to see themselves like as a scientist. And so there's a lot of research that goes into this program too. And they have these surveys from before the program and after the program, and it asks a lot of questions about like science identity. And it's like so exciting to see that usually like after the program, people who initially didn't see themselves like as a scientist, like do see themselves as a scientist. And then also getting to meet graduate students who like look like them or have had similar experiences to them can like be really empowering. And a lot of people don't know that you get paid to get a PhD. And so a lot of people like think that if you're in graduate school, it means that like you're rich or, you know, whatever. And so it's really important to also like say, oh no, like this is an actual like job, like you get paid to do this. And there is a lot of privilege that goes into being in a position to even apply for PhD programs. But I think that like it has to start somewhere, you know? Yeah. So, yeah.
I was going to say like that is like having mentors or like people around you that tell you that you can try to strive for something.
Yeah.
Makes a world of a difference, right? Rather than like people that are always saying that you can't do something. Like I know I personally myself, like I come from an immigrant background, and so like I didn't even know like the college process, like you said earlier. And it's like if there was somebody to like tell me like, oh, okay, you just go here and you can find your resources here, and you know you apply here, like that would have been, you know, a game changer. But sometimes though it's like these challenges are nice too, just so like on the other end of the spectrum, if you're handed everything, right, then it's sort of like you lead into that, you know, entitlement area to where it's like, oh, you think people will do everything for you. But, you know, the opposite of the spectrum is like, so long as it like doesn't take you over completely and like you have no idea what to do, then it's good to have some challenges from time to time. But I'm just saying like overall, I think if there was like a base level of understanding for like, especially like high schoolers transitioning into college, like it's a difficult time, right, already. And obviously like everybody comes from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and so it's just like if there was a helping hand, that would be awesome. Yeah, it's so challenging because I think like a lot of different schools have different resources. And so oftentimes the people who have the most resources are the people who need them the least. But yeah, fair enough. And so with your research here, is it more geared towards like data processing and like instrumentation, or is it more like field work oriented?
Yeah, so I guess it's a mix. My first paper was about using satellite remote sensing to study how the chemical composition of wildfire emissions changes whether the fire is mostly flaming or mostly smoldering, which is like flameless burning dominated by lots of smoke. And so right now, the current air quality forecasts and climate models assume that the composition of wildfire emissions is the same, regardless of whether it's mostly flaming or smoldering, just because the current models don't have enough complexity or the ability to scale the emissions based on whether there's more flaming or more smoldering. And so the first paper was using a satellite instrument to show that from space we can see this transition in lots of big wildfires. And so we were able to show that the chemical composition changes in time, which we already knew from like laboratory and field studies. But previously there was never a way to track these changes from space. And obviously field-based measurements are like the best way to study these wildfires in terms of like having the most information and the most complexity. But you can't have a field study for every single wildfire around the whole world. And so the like benefit to using satellite remote sensing data is that you can have like a global view of these different wildfires, and you can track them every day. And so there's like a lot of challenges with satellite measurements, and they are not, you know, anywhere close to as spatially resolved as like field measurements. but there's also like a lot of pros to them because they can be used to help inform the air quality forecasts and the climate models in a way that like you can't do with field measurements.
And like what you're saying, there's so much variety in like intensity or severity of the fire, like whether it's flaming or smoldering, like you said. Like, have you heard about the most recent like Hawaii Maui fire there? And like I was like, wow, that's really devastating to see. And like what do you think like the severity is there?
I think like more and more there have been these big wildfires in something called the wildland urban interface, or the WUI. And we saw that even here in Colorado with the Marshall Fire, where over 600 homes were destroyed. And that fire only lasted one day because there was like a huge snowstorm that came and took it out the next day. And also, like, increasingly, people are moving more towards the wildland urban interface. I think something like a third of people in the United States live in what is characterized by the wildland urban interface. And so because of like fire suppression practices that were really common in the 1900s as a way to like stop forest fire, like any fire was deemed as bad, so they just like put it out. And then now there's like all of this excess fuel that with like the warming of the climate have just become basically like a matchbox. And so now it's like, oh wow, like how do we manage these things? And then in Hawaii too, I'm not sure how it started. I'm not sure if it was human caused or lightning. I'm sure they know, but I'm just not sure. But regardless, because there was like all of this fuel and it was close to people's homes, like so many people's lives were devastated, just like how they were here. And then there's like really long lasting impacts with the smoke impact of people's homes who did survive. And so like people in my research group put up instruments in surviving homes from the Marshall Fire, and we're like measuring all of the different things that basically got like stuck to the walls or stuck to furniture after the fires.
It's just so messy. Like the aftermath is often expensive and like you said, devastating for a lot of people because it's their homes that they're losing. And with the evacuations, like who knows where they're going to go, if there's shelters around to take them or not, or like if they're on their own and they have to like find family members and then another area to go live with them for a while. It's just a lot that you have to deal with. And like specifically the one here in Colorado, at least there was some like suppression with snow, like you said, afterwards, like the day or two afterwards. But in areas where you don't have that, or you don't have any like rainfall or not a lot of rainfall and not a snowfall, that can really like add up. So like how can you tell like which fires to suppress versus which fires that you should just kind of like let go?
So this is like a really prominent and current like research question for a lot of like wildfire scientists. I think the main thing that, as far as I'm aware, people worry about is like how close they are to people's lives. Like I think the number one thing that people try to protect are people's lives, and then it's like property. And so if a fire is like way in the middle of nowhere, then people are gonna like let it burn, you know? And we saw a lot of this in Canada this past summer. Like there's all these huge wildfires and like all of this forest that is very remote. And yes, there are a lot of people whose like lives were impacted by these fires, but it's very different than the fire in Colorado, right? Like they couldn't just let that burn, you know? But also I don't think that they realized like how long that these Canadian fires were going to last. And so there was all of this like downstream effect of poor air quality across the whole country because the wildfire smoke was able to transport different chemicals that then became things like ozone and particulate matter that can really impact people's health. And these chemicals and particles can be transported very long distances. And so like even in the southeast of the United States, they were experiencing impacts from the Canadian fires, even though they were so far from Canada. So it's definitely like a balancing act of how to manage these fires. And sometimes they just can't really be managed. Like But I think for the most part, they focus their efforts to like save people's lives as the first priority.
Yeah, because I think that like leaving some remains behind, sort of like that ladder fuel or that matchbox that you're talking about, it's a wild concept, because like your first instinct, or at least my first instinct, is like, oh, okay, just get rid of this fire, take care of it, right? But what you're leaving behind is like, you know, a half-burned tree or half-burned bush, and then like the next time that comes, then it's like that much more severe and that much more intense. And so like with the possibility of like the future like fires coming, like do you think like prescribed burning is a good idea?
Yeah, I personally think that something that is going to be really important is like learning from the communities that were here like long before us, right? Like for centuries, indigenous populations were like managing forests, and like they didn't have these problems, and part of that was because the climate is changing at like an unprecedented rate, and so they weren't like dealing with the effects of global warming and things. However, like there were indigenous practices of basically prescribed burns. And then like when the United States like came to be, there was the whole like fire suppression, and now it's definitely not too late to have prescribed burns, but in some areas prescribed burns have turned into huge forest fires. And so I think you just have to be like really careful with like the weather forecasting community, and also with people who like know the area really well, to like work together in these things. Yeah,
because I was gonna say you have to monitor that really well. If you're prescribed, you're like intentionally putting a fire to fight fire, I guess. Like if you don't monitor for just a second, or like, you know, just a couple moments, you know, you're starting another forest fire.
And it's so easy for these to become like out of control. And at the same time, like indigenous communities were doing it for thousands, like, you know, so long. So like there's definitely, I think, things that like we have to learn. And I think that it's going to take like a big collaborative effort to manage these things. And I think that the weather forecasting is also like really important.
So with the work that you're in now, like when you get like the data from whichever like area that you're like researching on, do you think like you're able to like better allocate resources, like, or like to understand at least like which ones that we should try to tackle and which ones we shouldn't?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Like oftentimes when you're doing a PhD, you're focused on like very, very fundamental science, and it never really gets to that point where you can like actually impact society as a whole. But what really interested me most about this project was the opportunity to like actually take what we learned and apply it. And so I'm working with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and we're basically like using what we learned about how the wildfire composition changes with the amount of flaming and smoldering combustion. And we basically found like a weather proxy that takes into account like wind speed and fuel moisture and temperature. And it's able to pretty well predict how much flaming or how much smoldering like a fire is. And so they have these air quality forecasts and climate models that are used operationally by the government and by people to learn about the impacts of the fires and like predict how big it's going to be. And so right now I'm actually working on allowing the emissions composition to change based on this like weather proxy of like the wind speed and temperature and things. And so that's like where I'm at now for maybe like the next part of my PhD, is like trying to see if what we learned can be applied to these air quality forecasts and whether it makes a difference. And then if it does, we can go forward and like put it into the operational forecast. And so ideally these changes will like help improve the estimates of the particulate matter and also of the like ozone or smog. And so that can like be really exciting that hopefully one day it will be included in their operational forecast. And there isn't like huge changes we have to make to the model. We're not changing the model at all. We're just changing the we're just allowing what they already have, the fuel like emissions composition, to change. And it's just like some parameterizations that I'm working to include.
Gotcha.
So
like wildfires are so unique in that they're like naturally occurring.
Yeah.
Right. Because like when you talk about climate change, like a lot of the times a big part of the solution is like us as humans pulling back, or like not putting a lot of emissions in the air, or like not throwing things into the ocean. But with something like wildfire, it's naturally occurring, and it's not something that we necessarily have like a direct impact on. And so with that being said, like how do you think, like whether indirectly or directly, we can prevent like more like forest fires or like wildfires?
Yeah, so it's a mixture of things. I think first off, it has been shown that since the 1980s, especially in the western US, that increases in temperature are directly related to increases in wildfire intensity, number of wildfires, and amount of area burned. And so like the impact of emissions has caused the temperatures to rise, which have caused the fuels to dry, which have led to this like matchbox effect. And so like it's true that they are naturally occurring, but in previous parts of like the history of the world, when the lightning comes and strikes an area, the fuel is like wet enough to not like create a huge forest fire. But then with these like huge increases in temperature in the western United States, like it's just so dried out, and so it like catches. And also it's been shown that a lot of the big fires have actually been started by people. And so like there was a gender reveal party that happened in Southern California, and it led to like a huge fire. I think it was called the Bobcat Fire, and it like burned so many homes, and it burned like I think over 100,000 acres.
What were they doing?
They were having like some type of firework to show whether it was a boy or a girl.
Oh, okay.
Which I have my own issues with that, but yeah. And so there's actually been a number of gender reveal parties that have started wildfires, but also like people dropping their cigarettes, or like the Marshall Fire was likely caused by people, and then the NCAR fire too was likely caused by like a person. And so I think that there's like people need to do their best, or they just need to follow the rules, right? Because there's like certain bans on fires, and it's so easy to be like, oh, like it's fine, whatever, but then all of a sudden it's like not fine. So like initially, or like just begin, right, like try to eliminate like our own errors, which is difficult, right? Obviously it's like everybody makes mistakes, but at least like learning about that and like knowing like the potential damage that you can cause is helpful. And then also I think like doing our best to do what needs to be done to hit the goal of only warming the climate by like 1.5 degrees, as opposed to like 4 or 6 or whatever, because like these increases are going to have severe consequences on things more than just fires, but also on fires. So hopefully those like gender reveal parties are like a rare occurring thing, in which it's not like common. It's crazy. There's lots of gender reveal parties, but hopefully, I mean, I don't know, I guess it's fine if people want to do it, but like there's no reason to include pyrotechnics. Fair enough. But like going beyond that, like for like the big sectors like industry, like outputting like CO2 into the air, or like whatever chemicals, or like transportation and vehicle transportation, like do you think we can potentially reduce like those areas? I think it's like really important to point towards areas where atmospheric scientists and scientists in general have been able to point out problems, and that there have been like actual changes. And so back in like the 80s and 90s and 2000s, LA air quality was so bad, like crazy smog days, like photochemical haze, which is basically like when the sunlight reacts with diesel exhaust, which has a lot of something called like nitrogen oxides. So when sunlight reacts with the nitrogen oxides in the presence of organic molecules, which can come from gas evaporation, solvent use, paint use, and also a lot from just like trees. And so like when you smell like the trees, that's like some organic molecules, and those can react with the nitrogen oxides in the presence of sunlight to make photochemical smog or ozone. And so back then it was like so bad. Like people had to stay in from recess, people's eyes were hurting, people had like severe lung conditions. And then California like made it a priority to work to clean up the air. And so since then, there've been a lot of important regulations that have made it such that there are still sometimes bad air quality days, but they've like dramatically decreased compared to then. And so that's like a huge success story to point towards like, you know, we saw that there was a problem, we figured out what was causing it, we were able to like put some regulations in place that improved the air quality for people. And then another huge success story is with the ozone hole. And so there's like good ozone and bad ozone, and the good ozone is up in the stratosphere, and that like protects us from really harmful light that can cause skin cancer and things like that. And then bad ozone is the ozone in the layer of atmosphere that we breathe. So that was like the bad ozone from LA. But because of the use of different chlorofluorinated carbons, the CFCs, that were used for refrigeration, it was like destroying the ozone hole in a catalytic cycle. And so all of a sudden they were noticing that there was like an increasing size in this like loss of ozone. And initially the scientists thought that it was poor data. And so they were throwing out the data. They were like, oh, this is an outlier. Like, this can't be true. And so it took a long time for them to realize, like, oh, somebody's been throwing away this data. This is like an actual thing that's happening. And then it took a long time to figure out what was causing it. And then once they did, the scientists were able to basically develop a plan. And it took a long time, it took a lot of effort to convince the people in power to like listen to them. But once they did, the ozone hole's now been like improving. And so that's like a huge win also. And so I think that like there's a lot of important work to do. And I think that we have to remember that there have been success stories. And so like we have to keep doing these things.
Yeah, definitely like little wins here and there add up for sure. When you speak on California, like usually when I hear California, I think of like sunny weather and like the beach, but I don't think about like the air quality or like the poor air quality, which is I guess is a reality and to be expected because like there's so many people that live there and it's so like congested, and so you know you're gonna have emissions and you're going to have waste and you're going to have pollution. So like for you, like growing up in California, did you see a lot of that like coming out?
Yeah, especially with the wildfires, and also especially with visibility. And so like the sunlight basically can cause all of these chemical reactions that can lead to poor air quality. And the way that the wind moves is like during the morning, the wind moves from the ocean to the land because the land heats up faster than the ocean. And so there's this like cycle. And then in the evening, the wind goes back out towards the ocean. And especially in Southern California, there's all these mountains. And so that's another reason why LA can get really poor air quality is because the air is being pushed up against the mountains, like trapping all the bad air. And then it can like get cleaned out at night as it goes back towards the ocean. But then it is a very repeated daily cycle that's like pushing the air towards the mountains. And this happens in Salt Lake City too, because it's in this basin. And so the poor air quality gets like trapped within the mountains. And we experience it here too on the Front Range. And so yeah, it's definitely something that I noticed in terms of the wildfires. But now I see it like way more now that I like know the chemistry. And so sometimes when I was little, I'm like, oh wow, like such a beautiful sunset. But now I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's really poor air quality that's like causing this nice sunset.
Yeah. Is this something where you have to like plan around it, like your day where it's like, okay, I can't go out in like the high of the afternoon or something, because it's like the worst quality.
Yeah, during wildfire season, that's like especially true. And then back in the 80s, and then even up until recent, like in the early 2000s, there were like air quality days where like people had to stay home from school because like they couldn't have the kids at school. But then it's like you can't really escape air quality, you know, like it gets in your house. So yeah, it's kind of like an interesting problem, but that's why it's like so important to do what we can to like clean things up. And also this is like a global problem too, right? This isn't like just in the United States, but I think it's really exciting that like a lot of the scientists in the US have shown that you can have legislation to like actually improve these things for people.
Yeah, and I think that like globally what you're seeing, like it's just because like everybody is outputting so much, like whether you're you know, industrializing, or like if you're a developing country that's industrializing, that will add to, you know, the atmosphere, of course, and they're doing it in like, you know, the name of growth and like trying to better their country, so you can kind of empathize in that way. But like ultimately, like if everybody does that, then that's really like harmful for like the environment as a whole. Yeah, it can be really tricky. I think something we have to remember is like the global north is pretty much solely responsible for these like increases in emissions from the Industrial Revolution and the creation of all of these industry. And then like because we're one world, right, it only takes about a year for the chemicals to mix between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. And so like I think it's important to remember that even still the biggest contributors are the global north. And like when we think about the amount of emissions per person, the United States is still very like up there. And so oftentimes people will have these like graphs trying to like point fingers at other countries, but then they're like choosing countries like India with so many people. And so when you like think about the emissions per person, it's like important to remember that, where it's like, okay, yeah, that's a big number, but then like that big number for all the people is different than like the United States number for much less people. I remember like traveling through Asia. In the mornings you would see, you know, just a horde of people going into the subway station just to go for the morning commute to go to work. And I was just thinking like, wow, that's a really efficient system because you can have such a mass transit of people. And obviously like we have some of that here in the US, like the major cities like New York or LA. But I think overall, like, I don't know if we have as much as like a European country does, in terms of mass transit. And so I guess my question is like, do you think, like mass transit or like trains or like even work from home can like help in this way for like global emissions as a whole?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think that like, I think it is important to remember and keep pushing for like where the biggest polluters are like coming from. And so because of a lot of the like cleaning up of car exhaust with like catalytic conversion and things, like transportation is still very important for air quality, but it's less important than like other things. And so it is important to like remember to like focus on the biggest challenges. And I do think that having increased transportation will not only improve air quality, but it'll also like connect people much better. And so I think it is kind of crazy how like there's no trains from San Diego to San Francisco. And just like having that would really like improve how much people are able to explore and like visit other people without the need for a car. Like right now the US is so car centric, and it would be so amazing to like not need a car to be able to like go and do different things. And I guess like the US has a challenge in that it's so big and there's like such diversity in people's opinions on these things. And so, yeah, I think there's like a lot that needs to be thought about. But in the big cities, I think it is going to be like so important to improve the transportation. I think like you probably talked with Joe a lot about this. He knows way more about this than I do. But it was just so amazing in Europe how like we could get pretty much everywhere we needed to be on a train or like on the metro. And it was like so interesting when we were like in a very rural area, like that was the only time where we like needed a car. Whereas in the US, like even here, I think you don't need a car, but life is like exponentially easier having a car. And then like New York City is so amazing too, because you can get wherever you need to be without a car. And so I think hopefully in like city centers, that's where it's gonna go. Like in San Francisco, I had a car, and like I wish that it would have been like easier if I like, you know, I didn't need a car, but in order to like go surfing, it made it like way easier. And so I wish that like, I hope that we can have a lot more transit within these cities. Yeah,
like surfing, groceries.
Yeah.
Something like you know, groceries, like it's really difficult to like carry a bunch of bags on a like a bus or like a public transport.
Yeah, and I think that's also really important to think about is like food deserts and like who has access to food most easily. And oftentimes there's like more disadvantaged communities that are further away from like good food options. And so I think like also making sure that like people can get what they need within like a walkable distance would be like ideal, especially in the big cities. Yeah, I understand you can't really do that like in the more rural areas, but in the big cities, I think it's like really important to make sure that people like have the different things they need close.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about like a car because like how much utilization it gets. Because if you have your own car and you're not driving any of your friends and you're using it specifically just to go to work, you know, there's like 5 seats in the car and you're only taking up one of the seats, and then you drive it to work only to which to park it for 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever. And then you get off work and you drive it back home only to park it again at your garage or at your parking lot. And so it's just like there's not like the utilization rate of a car is like perhaps not as efficient once again as like a public transport system. But it is convenient from time to time, which is difficult.
And so I do really hope that like the public transportation gets better. And I think sometimes in the people in Europe who like live on the outskirts of the city, maybe they'll have like one car per household instead of like one for both parents, all the children, you know, like yeah, for sure. And so like for you in California, like what, like outside of the air quality, what was it like growing up in California? Yeah, I really loved it. I like grew up right by the ocean, and so I like loved getting to go to the beach like every day. And it was just like so nice how great the weather is. Like I never experienced like snow or honestly seasons, but there's also some like things I think you miss when you grow up in a place that doesn't have like seasons. Because there's not really like a clear marker of time, especially after you like graduate from high school, because like every day is kind of the same. And so it is kind of nice to have these like different seasons now where it's like, oh wow, like a whole year has passed, like yeah, that part is very different. But yeah, I think California is like a really interesting place. I think a lot of people paint it as like, oh my gosh, like it's so expensive, it's so liberal, like whatever. And in some areas that's true, but it's actually like such a big state with such diversity of like thoughts and like income and a lot of different people from like a lot of different places. And so I think it's like it's a very interesting like place to grow up. And also I think like a lot of different areas, it can be very like segregated, whether that be like on purpose from like redlining histories where like only certain races were allowed to buy houses, which of course like has very big downstream effects of like who lives there now. But also I think that there's like lots of different bubbles. So even though like I grew up in San Diego, like where I grew up is very different than even 15 minutes from where I grew up. And so I think like I also hope to see, I guess, more of like a mixing between different groups, because I think that like there's a lot to be learned and like shared between different people.
Yeah, usually like that's what the response I get too, and it's just like it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
And especially if you grew up from there, you probably have a bias.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, it's like you try to see the good things because you have to live in it every day. But on the counter side too, like you're saying, it's just like things are so expensive.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how you continue that like trend, and like how you continue, like for some people it's like you said, like the transportation is a little bit like odd because they're from like different cities, and so like they're forced to kind of take a car from one city to another, and so therefore you have to purchase fuel, and fuel can get really expensive depending on whatever vehicle you have. And so what I'm hearing as well is just like really expensive. Like if you're not in the inner circle of like affluence, then it's really difficult to like make it.
And I think that like I don't know, it is such a big place, and so there are like some areas that are more expensive than others, but again, that just like feeds back into these same cycles of having a lack of like diversity in different areas.
And like the diversity is like really amazing because like you try to, once again, like similar to like the traveling, you just get to meet different people in like different walks of life, and like be like, oh, okay, this is how you're living, and this is like not what I do at all. But it's still really interesting to learn. And like with a place like California where it's like really sunny and really nice from times, right? And like you get that like mixed bag of people. So like, did you experience a lot of that growing up with like a large amount of diversity? Yeah,
it's interesting because I think going from where I grew up in San Diego to the San Francisco Bay Area, there was like way more diversity going to San Francisco, but then both of those compared to Boulder, Colorado, it's really interesting that I think here is in Boulder specifically like one of the least diverse places that I've lived. But then it's also interesting because like Denver has its own, there is a lot of like certain types of diversity like in Denver, but yeah, Boulder's so interesting because it's like was it a big difference when you came to Boulder from California? I think the first thing I noticed, probably because like I am a white person, I think I noticed like, oh my gosh, wow, like everybody looks like me here. And I'm like, this is so different from like even where I grew up, then especially different from like the San Francisco area. And then the next thing I noticed was like the lack of different food options, because like I grew up in an area that has like a lot of different immigrants from like Asian countries, and so like we had so much different Asian foods growing up. And then there's like some restaurants here in Boulder, but they're not that good, you know? And so I'm like, oh my gosh, well, yeah, it's like very different. And I think that, I hope that it's like changing, but I think sometimes it takes a lot of time for these things to change. Like I have a lot of friends who were considering going to Boulder for grad school, but then they got here and they were like, there's nobody who looks like me. So they decided not to come here. And that's like a totally fair reason, honestly, to like not want to go somewhere because like you feel so out of place. What
was like the like a driving decision for you to come out to Boulder?
It was my advisor.
Just your advisor? Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that like in the PhD it's so important to be working for somebody who like you respect and respects you, and somebody who like you know has your best interest. And nobody's perfect. Like my advisor has some of like their own challenges, and still I think that it was like the best decision for me. And I think it's like challenging because you can't like win on all fronts, right? And I think that in a PhD program, you're with them for like 5+ years. And so it's like, I think it's kind of, I think one of the most important things is that you get along with the advisor, because it can go like so poorly if you don't.
I didn't know how much you enjoyed California, so I was thinking like you're trying to replicate California as best as possible, and like, oh, because Boulder has a lot of mountains and like outdoors activity,
Yeah.
like, oh, maybe that's why you decided to come. But
No.
turns out that like
Yeah.
more for advisor.
Yeah, it was like a huge change to go here, actually. Like initially when I was considering what to do, my undergrad research mentor was like, oh, do you have any geographical constraints? And I was like, yeah, west coast of California. And they were like, oh, okay. And so I like initially was only going to apply to like schools on the west coast of California. And there's a lot of great options, right? Like there's plenty of great schools to go to. But I'm really glad that like my view was expanded to include more than just California, because I'm really happy to be doing what I'm doing right now. And I think that the fit with my advisor is very special. So I'm like very grateful for that.
Yeah, it's hard. It's always it's not always the easiest thing to like gel with like your advisors or like your team, management, whatever it may be, or like funding sources. It's just like all those things have to click in order for you to like actually enjoy what you're doing and enjoy where you're doing it at. So I think that's really special that you're able to find that in Boulder, outside of California.
Yeah, I think so.
And so like being in more of like a STEM like related field, I know a lot of times like STEM can be like can tend to have a lot more males than females. I just want to ask if like that has affected you or like impacted you in any way.
Yeah, it's definitely really hard. I think that in pretty much any industry, and I think especially in science and especially like in leadership and in jobs, it can be really challenging to like be a woman in that like field.
It's like hard sciences for sure.
And so luckily, at least in terms of chemistry, there has been a shift where right now across the country around like half of the chemistry graduates are women. And so that's really exciting, that hopefully someday that means that at the higher levels there'll be like more of a mix. And we're not there yet. So right now, like most of the people in powerful positions in chemistry are men, and it's gonna like take some time and a lot of like cultural shifts in order to change that. And it's even worse in like other fields, like in physics, for example, where still there's like, I think maybe 25% of the people graduating with physics degrees are women. And so I think, there's definitely like a range.
Which is the scary part too, like 25% is an improvement.
Big improvement.
Yeah,
but then like at each level, the bottleneck gets tighter and tighter for like who continues. And so the only reason I like know the stats for physics is because of the PISEC program. Like we learn a lot of these things. And so like people who finish their undergrad, that might be like 20-25%. But then people who go to their PhD, it's like 10%. And then people who go on to become a professor, it's like 5%. Like this just gets smaller and smaller. Because it's like, it's really hard and it can be really tiring to like deal with all of this like every day. And you know, some days are better than others, and sometimes like you don't notice it. But like I'd be lying if I said that at least every semester there's like something big and annoying that you have to deal with it. And like depending on the severity of those things, it can cause people to be done. You know? And I think especially in a field where people go on field campaigns and like spend a lot of time in the field, there's like a lot of really sad and like scary things that happen. And the NSF just published a big report on all of the different types of like assault and harassment that people experience in Antarctica specifically, because it's like really bad there. I was just like looking at the report, and I think like, I forget if it was 59 or 69%, but more than half of women who go to Antarctica experience harassment or assault, and then like forced to stay there because like there's only a few planes a year, you know, that go in and out. And so it's not like once something really bad happens, the person can be like taken away. Instead, they have to live there and continue their life and their work until they're able to like leave.
Yeah, Antarctica is so like remote.
Yeah, it's so remote.
And like you said, like there's not a lot of travel options throughout the year. Like, do you think that like harassment and like abuse happens within the U.S.?
Yeah,
like a lot too. Like some place that's, you know, a lot less remote than Antarctica.
Well, I think like happens every day, even in like small levels, right? Like, and it doesn't even have to be in science. Like even just walking around Boulder today, I like have the hurt ankle, right? And then somebody like made a comment like, oh, like I want to see what happened to your boyfriend. I'm like, what? Like implying that I had like beat my boyfriend up. And that's what or they had beat me up. I don't know. But like, why do you say that? And I was just like walking down the street. But then I think something I get really often is like people are like, oh, like what do you study? And I'm like, oh, I study chemistry. And they're like, oh wow, like very regularly people will be like, oh, like I didn't realize like chemists look like you. And it's like they're just trying to like,
is it like a slight tone of like,
well, they're trying to like give some type of compliment, like, oh, like you're really pretty to be a scientist. But like, is it like sort of like backhanded a lot of the times? Like women aren't scientists, or like that the ones who are like not good looking. Like these are so horrible, and they're trying to like make a joke or whatever, but it's like not funny. And like it's very uncomfortable. And then like there's a lot of these like micro things that are brought up that like you don't want to be seen as trouble, or like if you were to say something and complain all of a sudden, then you're the problem. Because people don't want to work with difficult people. And so like as a woman you can get labeled as like difficult or hard to work with.
But doesn't that happen to men as well, or not as much?
I think that oftentimes like men in positions of power are like, wow, they're a great leader, but then a woman's a bitch, you know?
So like you're more like if you're a man, then you're standing your ground and you're being more like, you know, direct. Elbows out and direct. But whereas for like a woman, then you're just like, you know, a problem. Yeah. Essentially.
Yeah, and so it's like really hard it can be so tiring to like toe this line. And you're never doing it right. You know, like either you're not standing up enough, or you are like saying too much, or whatever. It's like so tiring.
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of the times it's not like the field itself or the work itself, or, you know, the tasks itself, but it's the people, like your peers around you, if they're disrespectful, or if your, you know, management or whatever team is above you is not helping you in the way that you're asking to be helped. Like that's why you quit teams, that's why you change. Oh yeah, I definitely get that. And especially like with the how it used to be, like in like the 50s or whatever, like there weren't a lot of females working in general, like period. And so like you said, like, which is incredibly sad sometimes when it's like, oh, okay, 25%, but 25% is an improvement from 3%, 5%, right? Which is insane, because like the structure wasn't just like set up that way. It was set up like family units, right? Like where like caretakers are staying at home for a lot of the female roles. But now I think we're breaking out of that, which I think is a positive thing, because then you have a lot more representation and different like opinions in the workplace. But I think, you know, from the people that were in charge, they can kind of see it as like invasive, or like what is the word, like ego hurting when you have like more women stepping into the work field. And I think that like these things are changing, but it's slow, and I think that it can be really challenging to like stick with it after all of these like small hits. I think that it's just tiring. You know? Like rarely do I hear is like an equal representation at the top, and then again equal, like rarely is the case where it's equal representation within STEM, which is like difficult because it's just a lot of people kind of like trying to hold on to what they have or had in the past, whether that be like power or finances. To break that mold is very difficult, because then now you're asking for like change on like a global level, or like at least like a governmental level, which is just like you have to have like a lot of leverage and sway to kind of overcome that, which is difficult. Like, and I've seen it too. It's just like a lot of like STEM fields, just like, you know, there's like one girl in the class, and it's just like, wow, like I didn't know it was like that. Like from the beginning, you know.
It's hard. And it's hard, like I guess even just like the way that people sometimes like interact with women in STEM, and like there's just like all of these assumptions, I guess, like, oh, you must not be as good at math, or like you always feel like you have to be like proving yourself, and even like things as silly as like color choices. I've been told, oh, your figures look too girly. Like, what does that mean, you know?
It's interesting.
Yeah,
it's really weird. Like, I don't know, maybe it's just like technical writing, or maybe not. maybe they just feel weird about it.
It's so interesting. And then it's also interesting, like there's a lot of like girl boss women who've like had to do a lot of the toxic things that have been done to them to like get to the top, you know? And so sometimes, like, just because you're working for like a woman doesn't mean that like you're in a safer environment, unfortunately. And so I think that something else that I really hope to see is like more women helping and encouraging other women, instead of like continuing all of the toxic trends.
Is that sort of like the idea of like hurt people?
Yeah, and like gatekeeping. And
okay. Yeah, I think that's, again, it's difficult to like overcome, but I think like the improvements have been good. Just not as fast as we like to see.
Yeah, and it's like hard too, because part of me like feels, because of my position, that I have to continue, and like in order to see more people, like more women in these leadership, like I have to make it there. And so I don't know, it's kind of stressful, because like first of all, like tenure track professors are like really hard to come by, and like I'm gonna have to continue dealing with these things for the whole time. And sometimes I'm like, just kind of want to stop, you know? But also I think that like regardless of what you do, you have to like deal with these things. And it might be like more prevalent in like the sciences than in other fields, but like even in other fields, like women just aren't respected as much sometimes. And so I do think it's changing, but I mean, like, just to be blunt, like, I think some people just need to grow up, you know, and I think, like, you just need to accept people are going to look different than you. They're going to be, you know, just different overall than you, and, like, have different ideas and opinions, and, like, this is where we're heading. And I think, like, there's a lot of positive that comes from that. If you're willing to, like, embrace it, you're going to get a lot of different thought and hopefully innovation that comes from that, too. Yeah, I think so, too. So hopefully.
Fair enough. So I wanted to like touch back on like the NOAA, which is the National
Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
So with them, do they, like, you brought up Antarctica, like, do they usually travel? Do they normally travel to Antarctica?
Yeah, I'm not so sure on, I think that there must be like some collaboration between NOAA that goes to Antarctica, but so far I think like the biggest groups that go to Antarctica are funded by the National Science Foundation, or the NSF. And then NOAA's like really big, so there's like a lot of different buildings all around the country, and they have a lot of different focuses, and there's different divisions within NOAA. So the ones I'm most familiar with are the Chemical Sciences Laboratory and the Global Systems Laboratory. and the global monitoring. I guess I can't even remember what the last one is. So, okay. But there's other ones too. Mm-hmm. But the reason I'm familiar with the chemical sciences one is because my advisor used to work for the chemical sciences laboratory at NOAA, and then I currently work with the global systems laboratory. Mm-hmm. And so the GSL, which is the one that I'm part of, they're like responsible for the air quality forecasting and like weather forecasting. And then the chemical sciences laboratory does a lot of the like fundamental science exploration. And so they probably have some folks who like go to Antarctica and things, but yeah, I'm not sure if I'll end up there. I don't know if I want to. I want to wait until things get a little better.
I was gonna ask if you had like, other than all like the negative abuse and harassment things going on, I was just wondering if you like, because like you're so into traveling, like if that is kind of because Antarctica is so difficult to reach, right? And you kind of have to have a purpose to go there before you go. And so I was just wondering if that was like on your bucket list at all to go.
I would love to, like at some point, if I like get the opportunity, but I think I would maybe want to wait a little bit. One of my best friends, her research like involves rocks from Antarctica. And so hopefully during her PhD, she'll get to go. But because of everything that's come out, she's like, I don't want to go right now. Like, this doesn't really feel, when more than half of the people are like reporting these things. And that's like not even including people who aren't reporting, you know?
Mostly coming from females.
Yeah.
Right.
It does happen to everybody.
Oh, interesting.
But it happens a lot more to females. Yeah.
Sure. And then beyond all that, like just the climate that it's in, right? It's like mimics space, essentially, right? Because you're in the middle of nowhere, it's remote, it's frozen, and you kind of have to suit up before you go outside. It's sort of like space, sort of like prison, right? Because you're just like, you're not around family, friends, or like nature. And so you're always just stuck in a room or like stuck between different labs all the time. Like, do you think like mentally that would be difficult?
Yeah, apparently you have to go through like some pretty serious tests before you go. And there's different seasons to the study. I think that the winter season is like a really long period of time. I think that's when people have to be there for like 6 to 8 months, like a very long time. And then I think sometimes scientists just go for the summer. And 3 months is still like a long time. And summer in Antarctica is still Antarctica.
Or like nighttime too. Like the sun is still up. And so like trying to work your sleep system to a point where it's able to handle that, or like, you know, have some blackout curtains or something. So
that would be interesting. And I think that a lot of scientists, I think it'd be more likely for me to go to Alaska. There's like a NOAA location in Alaska. But that would also have the challenges for sure, like so remote. But yeah, I think it would be really cool at some point to like get to go do some remote things. But I will have to learn more about actual instrumentation first for them to do that. But I think that I will be going into the field again next summer.
Okay.
And I'm like really excited for that, because I'm hoping that, I don't know, I'll be like an older graduate student. And so hopefully I can like create a safer space than the space that like I was in. And again, I had a really good time. And like, I don't want to like bash on my like lab or anything, because I love them a lot and I really love my advisor. And I think that like there's improvements that can be made. So I'm excited to like be part of that.
Yeah, for sure. You learn a lot too, obviously, but like the way in which you learn may not have been there if you were, you know, male instead of female. Hopefully there's just more improvement, and hopefully like you are able to cause that, or you're able to create that environment where it's safer for other females or anybody really just to come in.
And I think it's important to like have these conversations and be like quite frank about how things are. Thank
you for coming by and sharing. I think you're incredibly like just like nice and genuine person, and I think that you will continue to have like impact and improvement for you know, females coming into engineering or coming into like STEM related fields, and that they're not scared to stand up for themselves.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really great.
Awesome.